Well, it looks like today might be a very special day. It looks like the White House may have actually chosen a side in the impasse between big crypto and TradFi. If the impasse you would actually like to see get resolved right now is mainly between the actual price of crypto and what you would like the price of crypto to be, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies and the Army of Spies and the Army of Spies ticker AOS. All right, welcome to the episode. Let's see who's here. Puckyhawk is here. He says, "Woot, legend, first one." That's true. You were first. Omar Wright says, "Let's fucking go." Let's see. Hilldog, let's fucking go. Hilldog says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got a gangster president." Yeah, it's kind of hard to argue against that. He's definitely doing gangster things. That's for sure. Tony Gamp says, "It's hoodies versus the suits. Let's fucking go." It's true. Let's go, but choose wisely. Yes, Otis Frichov is right. Cardano for the win. Bonjour. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining. Hilldog says echo. There's an echo. Okay, let me see if I can hold on one second. Let me see if I can fix the echo. I think I know what is causing that. Let me see. I think I can fix the echo. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. Okay, hopefully that fixed the echo. Hopefully that fixed the echo a little bit. Okay, I think I know exactly what caused it. You guys can tell me if the echo has gone away or not. Patrick Stewart, thank you for joining. GM is here. Brown Beardo is here. James Syracuse is here. James Syracuse, thanks for joining. GMV, hey, thanks for joining. James says he heard the echo too. Hilldog as well. Hola, Rulo. Okay, Hilldog says the echo stopped. Okay, interesting. We got a Midnight City check-in here from Brown Beardo. I see that Corvin Quell tried to create character yesterday and failed. Why does it sound like a Sims try for baby action? Yeah, I think I saw this on like the first day. I think might have seen this on the first day. This sounds familiar. I could be wrong, but I think so. No, just the intro. Okay, I know what that was. I turned on a little functionality that I wondered if it was going to cause problems. It did, but I believe I know what that was. Yep. Okay, thanks for the check-in, guys. Okay, so obviously this is not a choice. Most of these videos are from the perspective of Cardano, right? The little astronaut really represents all of us in Cardano. It doesn't even represent crypto. It really specifically represents us in Cardano. See, James Syracuse says, "Let's fucking go." Pupper says, "Pause down, bones up." I like that. So this particular little thumbnail is not from the perspective of our astronaut or from us, really. This was a choice for the executive branch to make. So this was not our choice. Usually it's about choices we have to make in crypto, choosing from the perspective of crypto. This is about a choice the executive branch had to make. And today, these are the wild boys. These are the wild boys. God knows what they're going to do tomorrow, let alone next week, let alone next year. But for today, it looks like they've chosen our side. Before we jump into that, though, I want to tell everybody I'm going to be out, not tomorrow, but the next day. Not the episode in 24 hours. I'll be here for that one. But the one in 48 hours, there will be no episode. Unfortunately, I've got something I absolutely have to do at exactly the time we normally do this. So there will be no episode in 48 hours. Someone is having a life event, not me, someone else, and I absolutely have to be there, or I'm afraid they will never forgive me. So I absolutely have to do it. But this is the choice largely that was faced by the executive branch, right? You could ask yourself, okay, this is the US federal government executive branch. They are certainly going to choose those old gentlemen on the right who look very greedy and like they probably do unethical things to fulfill their creed. They are certainly not going to choose these hoodie-clad young crypto hooligans on the left over there. They are not going to be the choice. But what did we see today? We saw the beginnings of the choice toward the hoodie clad crypto guys. So I've been saying for a long time on this channel, this whole thing between big crypto and TradFi was a zero sum game. And something was going to have to happen to break the impasse. Something was going to have to happen to break the impasse. And I had a feeling it was going to have to be one of the sides blinking, one of the sides basically deciding to give ground. And I was afraid it was going to be crypto that would blink because we're not TradFi, we're not Wall Street, we're not the bankers. I was afraid we'd be the ones to blink. But in fact, it looks like today, and like I said, this could change tomorrow. These are wild boys we're dealing with. But it looks like the White House is choosing us, which is maybe the first time this has ever happened in the history of crypto. Not just the White House choosing us, but anybody in federal government, aside from a few allies in Congress choosing us. This is like the first time this has ever happened. And the timing is good. We really needed it right now. So like I said, this may not last, but for now, something good is happening. Here's what I wrote. For a while, it's been looking like a zero-sum game where there was no real path to compromise between big crypto and TradFi. Hopefully, this is an indication that the White House will come down on the side of crypto to break the impasse. That's what I'm hoping for. So here is the tweet from, normally I would say the White House, but I think we all know this is just him. This is just Trump posting. I think we all know this is him posting. So he says, the Genius Act is being threatened and undermined by the banks, and that is unacceptable. We are not going to allow it. The U.S. needs to get market structure done ASAP. Americans should earn more money on their money. The banks are hitting record profit. You know, he's like echoing Brian Armstrong of Coinbase's words right there. The banks are hitting record profits, and we are not going to allow them to undermine our powerful crypto agenda that will end up going to China and other countries if we don't get the Clarity Act taken care of. So here he's pointing out, if we don't make the US the home of crypto, crypto is just going to offshore itself. Why? Because crypto has always done that. Crypto has been, you know, in a lot of ways, a largely non-American phenomenon in terms of actual operations. A lot of innovation, sure, a lot of founding events happened in the US, but operations-wise, a lot of the biggest crypto entities offshore, right? For example, why are all the foundations out of Zug in Switzerland? Even the Cardano Foundation, Switzerland, Ethereum Foundation, Switzerland, originally at least. I have no idea what their current status is, but you know, that is regulatory arbitrage, guys. That is not for the love of clean alpine air. You know, that is regulatory arbitrage. So he says the Genius Act was the USA's first big step to make the United States the crypto capital of the world, and getting the Clarity Act done is the next step to finish the job, and most importantly, keep this big and powerful industry in our country. Thank you. Finally getting some respect from the goddamn any White House, right? You may hate this White House. That's fine. That's your prerogative. But this is a White House that does like us. The banks should not be trying to undercut the Genius Act or hold the Clarity Act hostage. They need to make a good deal with the crypto industry because that's what's in the best interest of the American people. This is how you know Trump wrote it. He missed a word. This industry cannot be taken from the people of America when it is so close to becoming truly successful. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Trump. So this is a pretty big move. This is something he has surely been thinking about for a long time. This is something he's been thinking about for a long time. A lot of discussions, probably every goddamn day since this came up. A lot of discussions. I think he tried what he could to pressure Coinbase. He tried what he could to pressure Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase. And I think he's been having a lot of discussions. Which way should we go? These guys are not going to compromise. Nobody's going to blink. We have to cut the knot. There's a big tug of war going on, and they're never going to settle it. We've got to break out the old sword and cut the knot here. Which way do we go? Which side do we come down on? And luckily for us right now, at least, it looks like he's coming down on the side of crypto. So let's see what everybody has to say. Okay. Jay Marie says, hello, everyone. Let's go and hooray for Charles agreeing with Trump. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how much Charles is agreeing with Trump these days. I don't know how much. We'll see. I get what you're saying, but man, yeah, they seem to be at odds a little bit right now. Having a gangster for president, this is Omar. Having a gangster for president may not be a good thing. I would rather have a man with a plan. That is why I like Charles. I agree. There's some wild boy chaos going on in the US federal government right now, and it is not what people are used to. It's not what people are used to. I would agree with that. If I remember correctly, you were arguing it should be us and Brian Armstrong who should be the one to blink, that we should bide our time and be content with the scraps. No, that's not the way I would characterize it at all. The way I would characterize it is Brian Armstrong shit shouldn't hold us up. I would say that Brian Armstrong's need for stablecoin yield shouldn't override market structure. That's the way I would characterize it. I wouldn't say that crypto should blink. I don't think we're in the same camp as Coinbase. Coinbase's interests are very different than ours, right? Have you seen Coinbase arguing about fucking market structure? No, they haven't said shit about market structure. All they care about is stablecoin yield, which, and I've said many times, their position is correct, and they will win that position eventually. Should that hold up market structure until after the midterms so that maybe we can't get market structure for another 2 years? No, I don't think so. I don't think our needs should be subsidiary to Brian Armstrong's needs. I think his needs should be subsidiary to ours. Brown Beardo says, I would not be surprised if Charles' rant yesterday still reached Trump. Contrary to public opinion, I've heard time and time again Trump wanting to genuinely hear everyone's opinions in the room. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, he pays attention to what's going on in the PR space. Trump obviously cares very much about what people think about him, and he has a lot of haters. He already has plenty of haters. I don't think he's trying to collect more haters, despite how polarizing some of his actions might be. So when people who, endorsed him, I mean, there was an endorsement there right before the election. Obviously, Charles was on the side of RFK, but right at the end, there was a switch when RFK dropped out of the race. So when somebody like that, comes out of the woodwork and is like absolutely opposed to what's going on, it's possible. It's possible. I think what you're saying is possible. Brian Packard, good evening. Jay Marie says, just on this issue. Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, if yeah, that you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. On this issue, they do agree that Trump should come down on the side of crypto. I agree with that. Yep, you're absolutely right. No question. Isaro Vargas, evening. Palamus is in the house. Evening. Thank you for joining. So this is a good move. What does this mean? What is Trump going to do here? Is he going to direct his Republican majority in Congress to do their thing and push this toward the Coinbase position? I sure hope so. But this is just a tweet from the president. Like I said, he's a wild boy. We don't know what he's going to do tomorrow. But for today, this is a good sign. For us, this is a big thing. For Trump, it's just a thing. Well put, Rulo. The wild boy strategy has its ups and downs. Sometimes a problem has too many sacred cows that it stops new good ideas to break through. Yeah, that's absolutely true. The good thing about wild boys is they can get stuff done, but they definitely break some things on the way, right? And they get they get people pretty wound up. People pretty wound up. He has plenty to worry about. True. He's got a lot going on. We're going to talk about a bunch of it. So, everybody noticed this. Everybody was kind of waiting to see what was going to happen, because I think a lot of people shared my opinion that there was no path to compromise. There was no compromise on the horizon. No matter how much Brian Armstrong kept saying, we're close, they really weren't close, because somebody has to lose out on deposit yield, right? If Coinbase is allowed to do passive deposit yield, TradFi loses that. TradFi is not trying to lose that. So it was kind of a zero-sum game. Even Senator Cynthia Lummis, famously a big ally of crypto, She might say just Bitcoin, but I would say crypto. She says, America can't afford to wait. Congress must move quickly to pass the Clarity Act. Let's make the US the digital asset capital of the world. She's retiring. She's getting the hell out of there, but she can already see the writing on the wall. Very possible her party loses its majority in Congress. One or both, at least one house, right? And historically, this is the case. Historically, this is the case that when you have both houses and the White House, you're going to lose something in the midterms. She knows this. Everybody knows it. So she knows this needs to happen soon, right? She knows this needs to happen before midterms. So here's Eleanor Terra with another interesting little observation about this. She says, earlier at the Milken Institute Future of Finance event, some execs were betting President Trump wouldn't pick a side in the stablecoin yield fight, crypto versus banks, until further down the line after he was done fundraising off both. Spoke too soon. Yeah, I would have sympathized with this view up until today. Up until today, I would have said, of course he is, especially with what's going on the international front. Like Rulo pointed out, he's got a lot of other things to worry about right now. You would think that he would be too tied up with that. And yes, as these executives are pointing out, probably wanting to raise some money from TradFi, raise some money from crypto. You'd think he wouldn't just pick a side. I think what's going on here, I think we are like very much the beneficiaries of the interests of his sons in this case. I think all of his sons love crypto. I think all of his sons they seem to love crypto. And that's what's happening here. I don't think it's Trump being like, oh my God, we got to level out the global economic playing field with crypto. I'm so in love with the Satoshi white paper. It's his sons who talked him into this. And I think that's why we have a pro crypto White House right now. Sure. I mean, it lined up with, his strategy of getting reelected, it worked out that way. But I think the driving force between his interest in crypto, his being a proponent of crypto, is his sons. So, it's kind of amazing. I agree with these executives. I would have assumed he would have held off, raised money from both sides, and only picked like even after midterms. But it seems like he's trying to make good on his campaign promise of bringing us regulatory clarity. So we'll see what happens. Okay, I saw Bargas. At the end, Elizabeth wins. The bill basically codifies the SEC's war on crypto. The bill is trash. So I know everybody watched Charles's video. Yeah, you're talking about the dragon. I know. So I know everybody watched Charles's video, but it's more nuanced than that, right? Like Charles has a strong opinion on this, but when the opinion is like in the video, Charles is a very good orator, but what he showed you in the video is Claude's response when asked, I can't remember what the prompt was, but the response was basically like, how could the SEC, if it's allowed to promulgate regulations under this bill, how could an evil SEC make this bad for us? So what I think a lot of people are forgetting, and those things are all true, but what a lot of people are forgetting is that the way federal laws work, the federal legislative branch, hey Dolph B. Wolf, the federal legislative branch cannot predict all of the corner cases that are going to come up. A corner case is like the federal legislative branch, they have this idea, right? They're like, hey, there's some cryptocurrencies that should be totally legal. Like Bitcoin should be a commodity. Ethereum should be a commodity. Maybe you extend that all the way out to Cardano. These should all be commodities. In the same video, Charles did the same thing. He said that XRP and Cardano, just like Cardano, would probably be grandfathered into whatever. And he was worried about new cryptocurrencies coming out. Previously he was sort of responding to this perception that he was saying that Brad Garlinghouse climbed up the ladder and then raised the ladder up after himself, whatever. But the legislative branch cannot predict all of the possible corner cases that will come up under the law, right? And they can't sit around all day and just pass crypto laws. They've got a lot to do. They can't possibly pass enough laws to address all the different scenarios that will come up in crypto. So they've got to have somebody else do the fine grain shit, right? This is the case with almost all federal laws, all big federal laws, right? Federal laws that lay out a full regulatory framework for a whole, genre of activities or a whole large important industry like this. They can't sit around and pass enough laws to handle everything, right? You'd have to have a separate Congress just for crypto to do that, right? Because too much is going to come up. So what they do instead is they include in the law this little provision that says, hey, whatever the law applies to, they say, hey, we've got a regulatory agency. We've got an executive branch agency that is going to be in charge of this area of activity in the country. And that executive agency, that executive branch agency is going to promulgate regulations. This is like, you can think that as like Congress passes laws, the executive branch agencies promulgate regulations under the law. Congress is giving them permission, like, hey, we're not going to be able to hit all the little tiny fine grain stuff that's going to come up that our law doesn't address. So regulatory agency, look at our law and you do all the fine grain stuff in a way that's consistent with our law, right? So these are not laws. These are just regulations. That's why we have all these federal regulations. They're not laws. Regulations are not laws. They're regulations. They're rules, right? So what happens is we have this whole body of law called this whole, sort of like area of law called regulatory law, right? And we used to have this thing called Chevron deference, where, judges had to give, a very high level of deference to the regulatory agencies. They had to sort of give a high level of respect to the opinion of the agency on any particular issue. And then the Supreme Court came and cut back against Chevron deference. So it's not quite like it was before, right? You can still end up in litigation with a regulatory agency, and you can still win even if it has passed regulations, right? The regulations are a little bit different than law. They're not quite the same level as a law passed by the Congress, right? Especially now that we have this precedent cutting against Chevron deference, the courts might decide the regulatory agency passed a regulation that conflicts with the law. That's much more possible now than it was before. So you're going to have regulations whenever you're passing a giant regulatory framework that like this legal framework to regulate crypto. You're going to have an agency passing regulations under it. And for anything like that, if you ask AI, or like I said yesterday, a first-year law student, like if you got an evil regulatory agency, how could they, mess with the industry? It's always going to be the case, right? It's always going to be the case. They could pass regulations to mess with the industry. That's always going to be the case. No matter what, that's going to be the case. Whether we pass this bill now, we pass another bill in 5 years, they're always going to have to give the SEC and the CFTC the ability to promulgate regulations. That's how federal law works. So to say, like Charles's exploit number one, they might figure out ways to mess with the tolling of time periods like that 60-day period. This is literally the case, always. This is like a small, procedural issue that could really mess with somebody applying to, prove they're a commodity. You know what I mean? It could really mess with somebody. Procedural law issues can be the thing that, an applicant lives and dies under in regulatory law, right? These end up being really important issues, but it's always the case. This is always the case. What would happen here is always the case. Does this mean that anybody in crypto loves this bill? I've covered like every version of the market structure bills, going back to Fit 21 and the stuff that Lummis and Gillibrand kept putting forward. I've covered every single one of them, and I complained about every single one. I had problems with every single one. I didn't think they went far enough in the direction of decentralization. Do I think the same thing about this one? In a lot of ways, I think this one's worse. But you know when the time to complain about that was? Before the fucking House passed it. That was the time. The House passed this shit last summer. And sure, the Senate is doing its own things and they're putting together their own terrible drafts, but a lot of this is already in the draft that passed the House. Now the Senate is going to have to pass their version, and then it's going to go back and they're going to have conference and they're going to reconcile the two drafts, and then the whole thing will get passed. But we've had many iterations of this market structure bill. I've analyzed like every single one on this channel. So, and a lot of times like provision by provision, and complained about all the things in them. Like this is not what we would write for ourselves. This is not the bill that we would write. But I would also love it if every morning I woke up and Sydney Sweeney came over and told me I was handsome and handed me a fucking suitcase full of diamonds. That would be more optimal, right? I would tell her, hey, I'm already with someone. You can't say I'm handsome, but give me the diamonds. But still, that would be better than not. I would love to get that suitcase of diamonds every morning. That would be fucking optimal. But that's not the way the world works, right? We're not going to get the bill we would write out of the fucking Senate or out of the House. What we're going to get is a compromise, because some people in the House and the Senate fucking hate us. So what we're going to get is a compromise. Is this the best compromise we could have gotten? No, I would argue not. I would have taken some of those previous drafts. I like the decentralization requirements in some of those previous drafts. And like I said, I've covered like every single one going back to Fit 21. I would have preferred some of the other ones. But the time to go crazy about this was before the House passed their version, right? We're pretty late in the game now. It's great to be an idealist. I'm glad we have idealists. I would say that Charles, in a lot of ways, is an idealist. And you want the idealists to be pointing out the optimal case, right? Like, I want some kid sitting in his dorm house in college to fantasize about Sydney Sweeney handing him a briefcase of diamonds every morning, right? I want that idealism to exist. That'd be an ideal morning, right? So I want Charles to be pissed that this is not the bill we would write for ourselves, right? He's the idealist leader of our ecosystem. But at the same time, this late in the game, we've also got to be realists, right? I want the Charles guy to be out there bitching about this bill and saying it's, not what we would write for ourselves. Are we ever going to get what we'd write for ourselves? Fuck no, we are not. Why? Because people like the dragon exist. Why is she such a huge bitch? I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that we're not going to get the bill that we write for ourselves. We're going to get some other compromise. And this late in the game, most of that is already put in place, right? If we're going to get a bill this year, it's not going to be wildly different than everything we've seen up to this point. It's going to look a lot more like what we've seen up to this point. And so I don't think, now's the time. I mean, you can take the stance like, oh, I would love for this bill not to pass. We just have nothing. Well, guess what? That fucking sucked under Gensler. When there was no framework, when there was no path to compliance, that fucking sucked. If you're afraid of a Gensler SEC promulgating regulations that are bad for crypto, guess what? They can do way more if there is no framework. And you can still end up in court, right? You can still end up in court with them whether they promulgate regulations or not, especially now that we have judicial precedent pushing back on Chevron. So you can go to court with them either way. They can promulgate good or bad regulations either way. But at least if we have something, we have a path to compliance, right? That's one argument for taking the bill, right? Not that we have a choice. It's going to happen regardless of anything anybody in Cardano says, right? So at least if a bill is passed, I'm just being a realist here. I'm not saying this is the ideal case. This is not the idealist Sydney Sweeney with a briefcase of diamonds thing. I would prefer that she brings like an omelet as well as the diamonds. I would actually she in one hand, she has a plate with like a carnivore omelet. And in the other hand, she has the briefcase of diamonds. That'd be like ideal. But I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying nobody in Cardano can make that happen, right? This late in the game, we either are going to get nothing or we're going to get something that looks like the iteration of the bill we've already seen. And I would like to have a path to compliance for projects, because before, guess what? A Gensler SEC basically just says there is no path to compliance. And then you're ultra fucked, right? Who wants to be ultra fucked? I'd rather be semi fucked. So, okay. Yes, they could. And guess what? Guess what your boy Gary Gensler did with no framework? Exactly the same thing, right? But here's the deal. If they here's the deal. You're not going to have that. You're not going to have that under any kind of a friendly SEC. And also, you can still sue the SEC. People have this opinion that, like, if there is a law and the SEC promulgates any regulations at all, they can't be sued. That is not the case. That is not the case. But yeah, under the Gensler SEC, we did get exactly what you're describing. And if there is no path to compliance, we could get that again. But at least if there's a framework, there would be a path to compliance. Under the Gensler SEC, he straight up told people, come on in and talk to us. And then he was like, yeah, there's no path to compliance. Screw you. Here's your enforcement action. Right. I think having a path to compliance is better than that no framework Gensler situation. Dr. Doak, hey, how's it going? So you can take that opinion, Omar. Staying positive, probably nothing will be agreed upon this year. It's possible. It's possible we get nothing. And it probably, you know what I mean? It won't really matter during the Trump administration as long as they stay positive on crypto. It won't matter during the Trump administration. When this stuff could get bad is when the Trump administration is gone, because they'll control the SEC until he's gone. But when he's gone, you know, all bets are off. So I think Cardano wins either way. Either banks will win and more people stake other things like Cardano, or crypto wins, bringing in tons of people, eventually making everything go up. That'd be nice. That sounds good. Delpy Wolf says, agree. Pardon me for being the cynic, but a broken government can't make good regulation. You can have that opinion, whatever. Okay, so let's move on. So for those of you who don't want a Clarity Act this year, you might get your wish. You might get your wish, but all of our allies who are in government are trying to make it happen. So, you know, you could get your wish. If they fail, you could get your wish. But S. Walker says, I'd just like to get back to buying Lambos again, at least to be able to dream about it, right? At least to be able to dream about it. So talk about the milking thing. Okay, so those are the biggest things definitely going on in crypto right now. Whether or not we actually get the Clarity Act is the biggest thing going on in crypto. And most people in crypto are rooting for it. All of our allies in Congress are rooting for it. The executive branch is rooting for it. Obviously, the big crypto guys who actually have a seat at the table are rooting for it. It's probably just a minority of people in crypto, Charles and some other people in Cardano, and, you know, people scattered across all the other ecosystems who are hoping for no Clarity Act. Me, you know, it's like there are persuasive arguments on both sides, but that thing we had with no framework in Gensler was bad. I would rather have a path to compliance laid out by Congress than not have one. I think that's much better. To me, that's way more logical. Okay, so here's the other big thing going on. Here's the other big thing going on right now. And this was kind of a huge surprise, and it's a much bigger deal than I think a lot of people realize. So we've talked a lot about everything going on in Iran, and there are a lot of things going on every day. This is a little bit more important than most of the things we've talked about. Besides the actual initiation of kinetic military activities, this is probably the biggest thing that's gone on, for a reason that not a lot of people are talking about. So basically, the day started out with Trump sort of giving some hints that he would be willing to support, you know, groups on the ground in Iran opposing the clerical regime. And then this came out. U.S. President Donald J. Trump is open to supporting groups in Iran willing to take up arms to dislodge the Islamic regime, including Kurdish factions in northwestern Iran. U.S. officials told the Wall Street Journal an idea that could turn Iranian factions into ground forces. So this is really interesting because all along they've been saying we don't have a posture that would support U.S. ground forces. There's no plan for U.S. Boots on the ground. And I was like, this is so weird because a lot of professors, it's controversial, but a lot of professors, you know, have been saying for like the last 30 years that you can't really accomplish regime change without some kind of boots on the ground. So I was like, this is really weird. And they're not really saying they want regime change. They're just saying they don't want Iran to be able to blockade the Strait of Hormuz or to use their ballistic missile and drone capability to hide behind until they can build nukes. So that made sense when Rubio said that yesterday. But the truth seems to be that they did plan for boots on the ground, maybe just not necessarily US boots on the ground. So I changed the saturation and brightness to our sport model in the holding pond. And I could see it all along. It didn't really change like how much I could see it. If I hadn't noticed it, it would have made it easier for me to notice it for sure. But I couldn't like make out additional details or anything when I changed it. Groundbreaker says, like I mentioned yesterday, the verbiage is so vague, as in decentralized. How are you going to sue the agency saying they're doing anything wrong? There's no agreed evidence to build a case with. So ambiguity is where the judicial branch comes in. That's exactly ambiguity in statutes and ambiguity in regulations, like exactly what you described, is exactly where the judicial branch comes in. So that's what they do. Okay, so we should go through this. So the reason why this is so significant, right? The Kurds are the obvious pick. If you're going to pick some faction other than the protesters in the streets to give guns to, it makes sense because you can't really reach those protesters in Tehran. You can't really get guns to them without encountering the IRGC. The Kurds are the natural pick here. So why is this so significant? So let's go through a few of these posts. Breaking: the CIA is working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of fomenting a popular uprising in Iran. CNN: the United States and Israel are seeking to foment an armed uprising inside Iran using an armed Kurdish fighting force, which has been built up since the 12-day war in 2025. So all of a sudden, it becomes apparent this has been the plan for, since the 12-day war. ITV News understands that since last year, weapons have been smuggled into Western Iran to arm thousands of Kurdish volunteers. They are expected to begin a ground operation within days. So this was the plan long before the beginning of the strike. This is the same information right here. Kurdish sources, they've asked the US and Israel to provide air cover. So there's been a lot of coordination going on. Why is this significant? So here's a map of Kurdish population centers. This is Iran over here. Here's Iraq. Here's Azerbaijan and Armenia. And what do we have over here? This is Turkey. This is Turkey. And you notice this area here. It covers parts of Iran, parts of Iraq, parts of Syria, and a huge chunk of Turkey. So Turkey is our NATO ally. What are they most freaked out about? They're most freaked out about armed Kurdish factions. So here's the section of Kurdish population centers in Western Iran, right? It makes sense because the CIA could just drive right across here and deliver weapons to the Kurds in this area. And then they can go on over to Tehran and do their thing, right? Turkey and Erdogan are going to have something to say about this, right? And I can guarantee probably Turkey didn't know anything about this until recently. If they did and they didn't say anything about it, I'm like amazed, because famously, like there were Americans who were fighting with the Kurds in either northern Iraq and Syria, probably both. But I've actually seen videos of Americans fighting with a Kurdish faction in this area here, south of the Turkish border, and being chased, having to like run into caves because Turkish drones were coming, trying to kill them. And then the same exact person showing up later, obviously this person is a mercenary, showing up later in Ukraine, and Turkish drones were actually on his side. So there's some wild stuff going on here. Turkey usually responds very strongly to any kind of issue with armed Kurdish groups. So this could get interesting over the next couple of days. You can just Google Turkey and Kurds, and you can read the complete history of what's going to be highly discussed here in Turkey. Okay. Okay. Yep. Isaro Bargas hit it on the head. This could pose a problem. Turkey may oppose the plan and may be forced to take action. Yep, exactly. So they actually can't. They actually can't because of NATO. They would have to pull out from NATO. They would have to pull out of NATO. Actually, we can invoke the NATO treaty and force them to so if we were just if we had allowed Iran to strike first, I'll put it this way. If Iran had struck first, if they had sent a drone or ballistic missile to one of our embassies, we could have invoked the NATO treaty and forced Turkey to attack Iran. But because they're a NATO ally, this puts them in a precarious situation. Okay. Puggy says the only people I know having a problem communicating are those that want Trump to be evil but can't seem to make it happen. So it's definitely very polarized right now. But this is a very interesting issue. Turkey, I think a lot of people are holding their breath, just waiting to see what Turkey has to say about all this. I guess it's possible that Trump could have worked something out with Turkey, but we'll kind of know in the next couple of days. Probably already Erdogan has put something out there, or he's scrambling with his advisors, and the Turkish government will come with something. But we'll probably hear something out of Turkey very soon, I would imagine. Okay, and of course, on the same day that this is announced, we get this news: Iran armed forces attacked a headquarters of Kurdish separatists, claiming they planned a ground operation in Iran. And pretty much the US government is telling you, yes, they planned it with the CIA and using CIA weapons. So this is kind of interesting. Here's another little detail. I actually agree with this. Marco Rubio is a great Secretary of State. I 100% agree with this. To be honest, this might seem controversial to some people, but I wish Marco Rubio was going to be the candidate in the next election. I know him and JD Vance are very close friends, but I kind of wish the roles were reversed and it was Marco Rubio who was going to be the president and JD Vance just like be the vice president again. Marco Rubio is a great Secretary of State. I agree with that very strongly. Other people might agree. Disagree. That's okay. So, speaking of diplomatic issues, Steve Witkoff, who's one of the negotiators along with Kushner, with the Iranians, revealed kind of an interesting detail. So S. Walker agrees. Yeah, Marco Rubio is like underappreciated. I kind of think if he can get into that VP spot, I wish he was going to be the presidential candidate, but if he can get into that VP spot, man, I think he might be I mean, obviously then he could be president, at some point after that, but yeah, Marco Rubio is very, very capable. So, and probably, I mean, it makes sense. The dude was on the Gang of Eight for a long time. He's already familiar with all this stuff. He was briefed on all this stuff. He brought that up, in fact, the other day when he said he's already given more briefings to the Gang of Eight than he received the entire time during the last administration. When he was on the Gang of Eight and the other party was in the White House, they briefed him less than he's already briefed the Gang of Eight. So, okay, Steve Witkoff said this. Let me say this because I forgot this small little detail. This is an important detail. In that first meeting, both the Iranian negotiators said to us directly with no shame that they controlled 460 kilos of 60% enriched uranium. And they're aware that they could make 11 nuclear bombs. And that was the beginning of their negotiation stance. So they were proud of it. They were proud that they had evaded all sorts of oversight protocols to get to a place where they could deliver 11 nuclear bombs. So that's how the Iranians, according to Witkoff, that's how they started the negotiation. Oh, by the way, we can make 11 nuclear weapons right now. So no surprise to me that an American White House, upon hearing that, is like, yeah, we gotta get rid of these guys. Puggy says, according to my feeds, Marco has like a couple thousand jobs, including spokesperson to an alien invasion from outer space. Yeah, actually, he's one of the better ones to be in charge of any kind of alien policy. I would be in favor of him being in charge of that. Yeah, we've actually talked about the Mujahideen and Rambo 3 before on this channel. Yeah, I gotta say, this could go wrong. This arming the Kurds thing. I mean, maybe they pull it off, but this could definitely go wrong. This is sort of like the beginning of many chapters of like books detailing the history of proxy wars during the Cold War, right? In this case, it's not a proxy war. We're directly involved, but it would be a proxy force. So this is definitely exactly like the beginning of many chapters in a lot of those books. Brown Bearder says before Trump, Marco was no bueno. Being involved with the Trump admin has been done him tremendous goods, like other politicians I can name. I'd be happy with either Marco or Vance. We have a deep bench. Yeah, I mean, people are gonna have all kinds of opinions. People are gonna have all kinds of opinions about any politician, and that's okay. So, okay, so I mean, this kind of explains a lot of the Iranian delegation making this statement at the beginning of negotiations. Kind of explains a lot of what went on in those negotiations. Like it was obvious from the start, I think, to a lot of people that the U.S. was just stalling so they could get more assets in place, which turned out to definitely be the case. But when they say shit like this at the start, you're kind of like, yo, you're describing the absolute worst case scenario for the US. You're threatening the worst case scenario. If that's your starting point, then the US is probably going to do something pretty extreme, which they eventually did. So, okay. This is also interesting. Speaking of nuclear things, Pakistan's foreign minister, we informed Iran to take into account the mutual defense agreement between us and Saudi Arabia. Pakistan's defense pact with Saudi Arabia appears to allow its nuclear weapons to be available to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. A Saudi official described it as a comprehensive defense agreement that encompasses all military means. So the Saudis are probably extremely pissed right now because they at least outwardly didn't support the US and Saudi strike in terms of at least not allowing us to use their airspace. And what did they get? They still got struck. They still got struck. So Saudis are pretty pissed right now. And it's not good for Iran that the Saudis are basically like threatening a nuclear strike by proxy here. They're like very politely threatening a nuclear strike by proxy. So this also happened today. A Shahed drone struck the U.S. consulate in Dubai. This pisses off MBZ and the United Arab Emirates, right? True, it's our consulate, so it's, basically U.S. soil, but still, the UAE doesn't like this. They sell themselves to the world as being the safest place in the world. If there are bombs going off, it kind of, cuts against that image of being the safest place in the world. I have liked a lot of Amjad Taha's stuff lately. He's been pointing out that even with bombs going off, Dubai is still safer by his estimation than London or Paris after 9 p.m., which is pretty funny. Here's another video of the U.S. consulate on fire. Is this a huge, hit for the U.S. to take? Not really. I mean, surely the Department of War and the IC are expecting exactly this. This is exactly what they expected, which is why they don't have their staffs in the consulates and the embassies waiting to take these strikes, right? They're striking buildings of symbolic diplomatic importance and that aren't supposed to be targeted during war. And, so it means something symbolically, but the U.S. was prepared for this for sure. Okay. Brown Beardo says, I do think it's a great idea to give fraud investigation reform to Vance, to give him an outlet to get his hands dirty and prove he can lead too. I agree with that. Yep, I agree with that. Street White says, a lot of influencers live in Dubai. Very true. Very true. Yep. Let's see. Ad Astra just came out on Tubi. Okay. But yeah, very true. A lot of influencers in Dubai. We're probably very concerned. Where do the cloud seeding disasters rate in Dubai's safety rating? Good question. Dubai definitely does a good job on social media. They've got Westerners, they've got Emiratis, they've got lots of people, spreading spreading their marketing message on social media. They do a good job. And this doesn't hurt. It doesn't have the same effect on Americans because we can't get out of our home income tax. So as Americans, I should say it's much more difficult to do it cleanly. A lot of other, I actually know people I've had this conversation with somebody, not an American, inside the Cardano ecosystem who was looking very closely at Dubai because, like a lot of countries, they don't get taxed on their overseas income, unlike Americans. So for Americans, it's less consequential. For a lot of other types of citizens, it's hugely consequential. So here's an interesting video. So you probably noted that Khamenei's son is being touted as having been voted in as the successor to Khamenei as supreme leader, and Iranians in Tehranis were screaming, death to the son, death to Khamenei's son, as soon as it was announced that he was going to be the successor from their apartment buildings. So the Basij, which is the paramilitary group, it's a volunteer paramilitary group under the IRGC, they just started shooting at the buildings. They heard people yelling anything off their balconies. They just, send some rounds downrange or uprange, basically up the building. So this is what's going on here. If you listen to this video, you can hear the people yelling, and then you can hear the rounds impacting the building. So that's what's going on in Tehran right now. So in the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump orders U.S. Navy to escort oil tankers to the Strait of Hormuz if necessary to ensure the free flow of energy. Yeah, certainly all this going on in the Persian Gulf is not going to be good for his highly vaunted low gas prices. So he also said he was ordering the U.S. Development Finance Corporation to provide political risk insurance and financial guarantees for all the freighters trying to get through the Strait of Hormuz. People have pointed out they're unlikely to take him up on that if the crews think they're going to get murdered by the IRGC. If they think they're going to have to take rounds, if they're going to take rounds to their ship going through the Strait of Hormuz, a lot of crewmen are not going to be comforted by the fact that the ship is insured. So we'll see how much freighter activity there is through the Strait of Hormuz. This is also interesting. Macron, he delivered a little speech here where he says, they do not support the U.S. and Israel and their strike on Iran, which is happening outside the confines of international law. However, he is very concerned about the UAE, so he's sending their carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, into the Eastern Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, and over to the Persian Gulf. So one by one, European powers keep committing to send assets to the Persian Gulf and other parts of the Middle East. So we'll see what happens here. Also, simultaneously, again, concern for the UAE, France announces its fighter jets have started flying combat missions over the United Arab Emirates to shoot down Iranian drones. Good. So hey, they're serving, a defensive. They say they're serving a defensive only role, but that's good. Those drones need to be shot down. So good for France. Spain, you probably remember this. From yesterday. We talked about this. Spain's prime minister has barred the U.S. from using bases in Spain. My response, good luck with that, bruh. And of course, just today, I knew this would happen. Follow up to yesterday's news, Trump is now cutting all trade with Spain. He's also pissed at Starmer about Starmer's initial refusal of access to Diego Garcia and other British bases. But Starmer has, as we covered yesterday, has already reversed that. So, okay. This is true. You could, Bitcoin Jesus did this, not, partially for the tax reasons, but also because he was pissed at the U.S. for being imprisoned in a federal penitentiary over agricultural fireworks, basically. But Bitcoin Jesus did this. He renounced U.S. citizenship, got a Caribbean passport, and spent most of his time in Egypt. Though when we last saw him fighting extradition, he was in Portugal or Spain, I think. But yeah, the exit taxes are for real. Exit taxes are for real. So I don't think it's quite worth it. I mean, we have treaties. The US has treaties with most other countries. The thing is, you just can't get away without paying any taxes. But if you end up having to, if you go to a jurisdiction where you have to pay taxes there as well as a US citizen, there are treaties back and forth so that you don't pay double taxes. And they've got extensive treaties with other countries. But someplace like the UAE, where you pay zero, that doesn't help you. So, yeah, I would not. It doesn't seem worth it. It doesn't seem worth it. U.S. passport is a pretty good passport. It's not. There are other passports out there, but U.S. passport's a pretty good passport. So, and obviously there are other reasons, but I'm just saying purely from a Machiavellian perspective, it's a useful passport. So, speaking of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. confirms that it has now sunk 17 Iranian ships. I think last we checked in, it was 9. Now it is 17. Iranian Navy, not very competitive. Not super competitive. CENTCOM also says it has sunk Iran's most operational submarine. It now has a hole in it. So the Iranian submariners not doing well, not having a good day. The Iranian submariners having a fucked up day today, a hole in the sub they were riding in. So I don't think they're having an excellent day. So Hong Kong passport did seem awesome until they fell under the control of the CCP, right? Until it was clear that they could be, prosecuted by the CCP if they said anything they didn't like, which is a problem. So, but yeah, Hong Kong, by all accounts, very cool place. Probably more so prior to CCP control. Yeah, I would agree with this. I wish we would have done more for I think this was very, very true right up until the point we didn't do more for, not that we could, but there were Americans taken by Hamas back to the tunnels. There were American citizens. And that was one of the most notable instances where America didn't immediately send guys to try to get our citizens back, but we couldn't really. Like, the IDF was in a better position to do that by far, right? Mossad's intelligence and the IDF's capabilities in Gaza far exceed those of the US. I actually wish the US would have done more. I wish we would have done more to get our people back. But you're right, though, in general, outside of that example, the US is pretty good about that particular thing. So, S. Walker says IT's machine guns versus samurai swords. Okay. So this is also coming up. This is also coming up right here. This is the Ayatollah Khamenei saying we need air support, and Xi Jinping sending a banner like a Cessna, pulling a banner that says "You're doing great." And then the quoted post here is, "We are not providing military support to Iran. We only offer moral backing." There you go, Ayatollah Khamenei. You're doing great. No air support, but air moral support. This does not surprise me at all. Like, what we've seen over and over again with Chinese military equipment is that we're told it's wonderful, right? It sounds great. It's like the perception is always they have the most high-tech stuff. They're like 3 generations ahead of us. And then somebody like Iran or Venezuela tries to use the latest Chinese, radar. You can debate whether or not it's the latest Chinese radar, but they try to use Chinese radar. Failure. Iran tries to use Chinese anti-air batteries. Total failure. So I think China is more than happy to stay the hell away from this conflict, because it's already sort of like failure by proxy in terms of the technology they're providing here. So one issue, yeah, this is actually, people underestimate this, but you have to ask yourself. We know how many people are supposed to be in the PLA. When's the last time they had a battle, right? Ask yourself that question as a matter of history. When's the last time the PLA fought a single battle, right? This is an army that exists in the provinces of China with no way to amass, and none of them have ever fought a military engagement. Their fathers didn't fight a military engagement. You got to go all the way back to the founding, to Maoist times, to find a time when the PLA actually fought a battle. Those guys are all dead. That was a long time. So I think that's true. The big problem with the PLA is the PLA hasn't fought in an actual war in the entire history of the CCP. They're rusty. So, okay, moving on. This is going to really freak. If people are freaked out by what's going on in Iran, this should only further freak them out. So, Southcom, which is in charge, of course, of Latin America, says Ecuadorian and U.S. military forces launched operations against designated terrorist organizations in Ecuador. And you can guess when they say terrorist organizations, what they're really talking about are narco terrorists. So, you're probably aware, like famously from the 1980s, mainstream perception was, cocaine, the cocaine problem, it was related in our heads to Colombia, right? And, it was in the days of everybody watching Miami Vice on network TV. So all the trafficking was happening via boat across the Caribbean and into Florida, things like that. These days, we know that the cocaine cultivation and refining, it's going on sort of, across the northern part of South America. You've got Colombia there, you've got Venezuela, you've got Ecuador, and we're all very, very much aware in 2026 that the Mexican cartels are involved in all kinds of trafficking. So it's no longer the days of the 1980s Miami Vice, guys in cigarette boats and sandals and fancy suits flying across the Caribbean. It's all happening the other way. So we know when Southcom is talking about terrorists, they're not talking about sort of ideological terrorists, religious terrorists. They're talking about drug traffickers here. So this is also going on simultaneously. You probably know for a lot of decades, the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, has prided itself on sort of building for this capacity to fight, like, what's the number? 2.5 wars. I think in the late 90s, they used to tell us they were shooting for 2.5 wars, which seems amazing, seems colossal. But if you just think about the assets we have in the Middle East right now, and even just in terms of strike carrier groups, we only have 2 strike carrier groups over there administering this war. And sure, a lot of our carriers are, the crews are on, are not on the ships. They're on shore. They're not deployed. Some of the ships are being repaired, things like that, upgraded. But that's only 2 of our strike carrier groups in the Middle East, and we have many more, although they might not be available at the exact moment. So this is going on. Okay. This is kind of interesting. Once again, I would love it if we could just sell the New York Times to the clerical regime's state TV network. So here's somebody caught the New York Times reporting that the clerical regime had only killed hundreds of protesters, when pretty much everybody in the world except the clerical regime is saying the number is like at least 30,000. So how they arrived at hundreds of protesters, I don't know. But you can see, I mean, the caption, the photo up above here, Iranians mourning the death of the supreme leader. And then it's like, oh, by the way, they only killed hundreds of protesters. So this also happened today. And this is probably a little bit bigger deal. People are sort of projecting this might be a much bigger deal than people think it is. So the South Korean stock market triggered circuit breakers and halted after an 8% crash. And you'll see a lot of people probably tomorrow citing historical examples of when this has also happened. In fact, somebody's doing it just down below here. Um, let's see, are they going through the historical examples? Probably, but people get pretty freaked when this happens to a large Asian market because dominoes tend to start toppling. So we'll see what happens here. Okay. Puckyox says, that reminds me, I want to tell Grok to have an argument with all four AIs, debating the viewpoints of all the others. Haven't thought of a good topic to make Grok explode yet. They are counting the protesters in dog ears, pretty much. Yeah, but Iranian citizens get to decide that now. Um, get to decide what happens now? Definitely. Brown Beardo says the New York Times mistakes always fall the same ideological way. Glad you were pointing it out too. Yeah, I mean, it's like it wouldn't be bad if they were just like bad at their jobs, but there's obviously an agenda there. Like there's a very strong agenda and ideology, and it's just there was a time when things were more balanced, and now is not that time. It is no longer that era. So on the UAP NHI front, this is kind of interesting. This is a little more too nuanced for most people to understand what's going on here. But this post kind of says it all from Chris Ramsey of Area 52. He says, did he just prove the existence of MJ12? MJ12 is majestic. So you probably know there's this thing in NHI, UAP, UFO, alien lore that there was this organization that was always in charge of all the UFO stuff for the US government. Having, it was basically like as secret as the Manhattan Project. And the name that's been attached to that in UFO lore is Majestic. This group, you can go back and read all you want about it. Much has been written about this. And it might all be bullshit, but the lore is that there were basically 12 people on this committee called Majestic, the Majestic 12, and a bunch of documents came out. Back in the day. So we have those documents, and nobody has ever known if they were fake or not. So here is one of those Majestic documents. These documents all came out, and they looked real. Like everybody who looked at them was like, wow, these look real. They're from like 1949. And they, are supposed to be from like the time when, Majestic was first set up. And everybody's like, we just don't know if these are fake or not. They really look real. They look exactly like they should for documents from the CIA in 1949, but we don't really know. So just today, it was revealed that 345 pages of Operation Paperclip intelligence documents were declassified in 2022. So just 4 years ago. And a guy just discovered this, hit the mainstream today. Let's see, when did he so he first revealed this on February 27th, but it kind of hit the mainstream today. This guy pointed out like, hey, there's something really weird going on here, because the documents that we know are actual documents related to Operation Paperclip. You know what that is? That's when they brought all of the German scientists over to the US, and they formed the Nazi scientists. To be clear, Nazi scientists. They brought Nazi scientists after World War II over to the US secretly, and they basically became our entire rocketry and space program. Our space program, our rocket program, Nazi. Because they brought these scientists over in Operation Paperclip secretly. So a bunch of these documents were declassified. What's really weird here, this guy noticed, hey, these documents all have a certain filing system, and they all are referencing these numbers. And the numbers totally correspond to the same numbers in these Majestic documents that everybody has been saying were fake all these years. So for a lot of people in the UAP NHI space, this is like very strong evidence that these Majestic documents should be reevaluated, and maybe the goddamn things are real. It's looking like maybe the Majestic documents are actually real. Otherwise, we'd have to believe that decades ago, somebody predicted the CIA's filing system from the same era. You notice these documents are from 1947. These are the real documents that were revealed, 1947 documents. So you'd have to argue that a couple decades ago, somebody predicted the filing system that would pop up when documents from the same era were actually declassified. So a lot of people going crazy in the UAP space over this. At the same time, we've got Representative Eric Burleson, who is definitely a part of the UAP caucus, revealing that he's been granted permission by the White House to visit some locations that he believes may be housing UFOs and alien bodies. Will anything be there when he gets there? Certainly not, right? He's been very vocal about wanting to visit these certain locations. And I'm sure the defense contractors running those locations, somebody's even putting it right, typing this right here. If it's on a property of a private contractor, the company have the right to push back or disallow entry to certain areas of the property. But more importantly, if there are any craft or biological specimens at those locations, they will move that shit, certainly, right? But still, I think it's good that people are talking about this. Let's see. D.U says, I always choose Cardano, always choose this awesome live stream and choose to smack that like for the algorithm. Thank you, D.U. Appreciate that. Streetwise says there's a good channel called What's Going On with Shipping. Could aid your IR workups. Ooh, that'd be really good for the Strait of Hormuz stuff. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you, Streetwise. Omar says, I don't want that from our government. And if they think that's good enough for Iran, I'll bet they think the same of us. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of people in the clerical regime who don't think good things of us. That's for sure. The Iranians worldwide in every country are happier than they have been in 47 years and are completely infatuated with Trump. Laugh out loud. We did the right thing. Yeah, that certainly seems to be the case. There is a gigantic corpus of evidence on social media that the Iranian diaspora is very happy, and likewise in Tehran, right? In Tehran, I mean, you can look at that video I just showed of people yelling, death to the son of Khamenei the second he's elected supreme leader, and then the Basij is shooting at them, right? So pretty obvious how a lot of the people in Tehran feel, very obvious how everyone in the Iranian diaspora feels. Say, okay. Let's see. Puckyhawk says, if I ran the facility, I would build fake UFOs for him to see. Yeah, that's a good idea. If you're like Lockheed though, and you're trying to keep up the appearance that you have nothing to do with UFOs, do you really want to show Burleson a fake UFO and have him go back to Congress and be like, yep, they've got it? But I get what you're saying though. You could have kind of a Potemkin village of UFOs, and then maybe humiliate him later by revealing it was all fake. It was all a joke. I mean, that's kind of what happened in the Phoenix Lights case, right? In the Phoenix Lights case, the governor, I believe it was the governor of Arizona, actually saw the Phoenix Lights. If you're not familiar with that case, there was a giant triangular shaped UFO, huge, like gigantic, that flew over Phoenix, and a huge number of people saw it. People made VHS tapes, right? So many people saw this thing. So the governor of, I believe he was the governor of Arizona, either the mayor of Phoenix or the governor of Arizona, but I believe he was the governor of Arizona. He also saw it, but the next day he didn't want to come out and say, I also saw it. So instead, he held this press conference where he had somebody walk out in an alien costume to make fun of the whole thing, just to make the thing go away. And then later on, he felt guilty about it. And he did interviews where he admitted, actually, I also saw the thing. But, he obviously just wanted the whole thing, the whole fiasco to go away. So he made fun of it the next day and everybody kind of forgot about it. But in fact, the dude actually saw the damn UFO. And there's a lot of lore on the Phoenix Lights. You can go back and find all of the disinfo propaganda, the UFO people would say, from, like the military saying, oh, we did an exercise with flares. Maybe you guys just saw the flares. But if you listen to the hundreds, thousands of eyewitnesses, they are very clear that they weren't fucking flares. So Fly Over Me says, made it. Let's UF go. Puckyux says, I was there in college and it wasn't but it was on the news feed. Oh, okay. You were there and you were in college in Phoenix. So it sounds like you didn't see it, but It sounds like you didn't see the Phoenix lights, but you didn't actually see the lights, but you remember it being in the news. Is that what you're saying? Or remember the governor in the gray alien spacesuit was a clown. Yep, yep. There, I was on South Mountain drinking beers. I could see all the city, and you could not see the triangular shaped UFO, could you? Interesting. Thanks, Omar. I appreciate that. Thank you. People laugh at this topic, but there's thousands of UFOs in our skies on a daily basis. Yeah, I mean, if you want, I mean, if you're like the super scientific skeptic, just look at the peer-reviewed work of Beatrice Villarroel. She's at the, what is it, University of Stockholm. She's a professor in Sweden, and she did academic work on transients. Um, she took the old image recordings. So they're like on the ones on like I believe they're the really old ones on like panes of glass or something like that from the Palomar Observatory, right? One of the biggest observatories. This one in Southern California, I believe. And she took so all of these images were created of the night sky prior to Sputnik. So there were no human things in space. Humans had not launched. Yes, in San Diego. Thank you. Thank you, San Diego. So she took all these panes of glass on which they had recorded these images. I could be messing up the exact medium of these images, but she took all these images that the Palomar Observatory had made of the night sky prior to any human thing being launched into space. And she showed how there were things up there that were moving around. In one picture, there's a thing that everybody, I'm sure, looking with their naked eye assumed was a star, and it's in one place on one night, and then on another night, it's gone, right? And she showed how when those things, the way those things showed up when they were in the shadow of the earth, when they could not have been like reflecting the light from the sun, how it proved that they weren't just stars because they were reflecting the light from the sun as if they were metallic when they were in the sun, but when they were in the dark, they were not. So they're obviously not stars, right? Stars giving off their own light, they're obviously reflecting the light of the sun. This is all peer reviewed. Nobody has debunked this, right? And it's before there were any satellites. So you can't say with satellites, it's in space. You can't say they're birds, and they're transient. They're appearing there sometimes and not appearing there other times. So it's a pretty tight case that there were reflective things in orbit around the Earth prior to the time when humans had the capability to put anything into orbit. And it's not like one or two, it's like many. There are many, many transients. It's a pretty tight academic case that there are things up there. So, anyways, check that out if you are the super scientific skeptical type. And I think we have covered all of the crypto news. I think we've covered all of the crypto news. So remember, if you join late, there will be no episode 48 hours from now. Someone I know has a big life event. My attendance is kind of a command performance. I must be there. I must be there. This person obviously knows nothing of this podcast. They have no idea. I told them I had something going on I couldn't miss, and it's being demanded that I appear. So there will be no episode. There will be an episode tomorrow night, 24 hours from now, but there won't be one 48 hours from now. But I hope everybody is having a great week. I hope you're looking forward to a great rest of the week, and I will talk to you soon.